Could all-out war come sooner rather than later between Israel and Iran? And will that war happen in Syria? Wednesday night saw the Golan Heights as heaviest fighting since 1974 and a direct confrontation between Israeli and Iranian forces. This after Tuesday's airstrikes south of Damascus. In both cases, that direct confrontation happening again in Syria, where Iranian forces are there to prop up the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Is it all going to escalate? And is this the consequence of after the pulling out of the United States from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal on Tuesday? Is a direct confrontation with Iran really what Donald Trump wants? The same Trump who's keen to withdraw U.S. forces in Syria. Finally, there's Iran itself, where the reaction has been muted so far. Beyond the rhetoric, what would the Supreme Leader decide for a nation that in the 3 years since the agreement has expanded its regional presence in Syria and Yemen, where cash-strapped citizens await more from the lifting of sanctions, and where hardliners today are in full I-told-you-so mode? Today in the France24 Debate, how far can the escalation go? And joining us, former UN General, he was UN General in South Lebanon in particular, Dominique Trinquant. Thanks for being with us. Hamza Galebi, who served as advisor to Iran's former Prime Minister, Miroset Mousavi, who remains under house arrest since the 2009 Green Movement. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, David.
From Beirut, Jasmine El-Gamal, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and a former Middle East advisor at the U.S. Defense Department. And joining us from Washington, Michael Pregent, a former intelligence advisor in Syria and who is in the Middle East, and who is a senior fellow now at the Hudson Institute. Welcome back to the show, Michael.
Thank you, France.
The France24 Debate on Facebook and on Twitter, the hashtag F24Debate. Yeah, we were saying reactions so far muted out of Tehran after a second night of strikes and counterstrikes, this time right on the border between Israel and Syria in the Golan Heights. Claire Rush has more.
Israel has called the strikes a blatant attack on Israeli sovereignty. The military says Iran fired rockets from positions in neighboring Syria, targeting Israeli forces.
Iran attacked Israel by firing 20 rockets onto Israel. 4 of them were intercepted by our defense systems, the Iron Dome, and 16 fell short. That was the reason which led to our response. Our response was indeed a massive one. We targeted Iranian Quds Force facilities, military facilities inside Syria that are there on the behalf of the Iranian regime in order to terrorize and to strike Israel.
Israel says it's not seeking war, but that it will retaliate if attacked. If confirmed, the attack in the Golan Heights would mark the first time Iran has fired rockets in a direct strike on Israeli forces. Israel says it has destroyed nearly all Iranian military facilities across the border. But the Syrian army said it intercepted several missiles.
Our air defense system was able to destroy a large number of the Israeli missiles overnight, which were targeting a number of our military positions.
The Israeli strikes killed 3 and injured several others, according to the Syrian army. Relations between Iran and Israel have been tense for decades. Earlier this week, Syrian media reported that Israel had bombed an Iranian military base south of Damascus. Several people were killed, according to the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. The recent strikes come just days after the United States pulled out from the Iran nuclear deal, sparking tensions across the region and the world.
Dominique Trinquant, usually the Israelis' official reaction is silence after there's any kind of strike in Syria. That's not the case this time. We've had the defense minister who's come out squarely and said that his forces have hit, quote, almost all of Iran's infrastructure in Syria. What does that tell you?
Tell me that we've got a big picture. First, Prime Minister Netanyahu showing that you've got evidence that the Iranian have a military program, which of course was the evidence he was presenting was known by everyone. It was prior to the agreement. Secondly, President Trump announcing that he will not apply the agreement, and Prime Minister Netanyahu a few minutes later saying that he agrees and it is perfectly online with that. And now he's showing that there is an escalation, and that's why the Israelis are showing that they are able to defend their homeland with the Iron Dome. And this is really the aim, to show from the start that there is a crisis, a major crisis, and that Israel is ready to defend and to destroy the Iranian who have been deployed in Syria. They have done that for a long time now, but you know, small pieces of destruction. Now, last year, they said we have launched a big attack and we've destroyed everything, which is probably not the case. But anyway, is showing that the escalation is at a certain level now.
An escalation, is it justified, this escalation? We saw the first strike on Tuesday, second one on the counterstrikes. We don't know who. Well, the Israelis claim that it was the Iranians who hit first on Wednesday.
Yes, probably, but we've got hardliner on both sides of the border. Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu, is a hardliner. He wants to fight. He has a personal interest in crisis. And on the Iranian side, you've got the Bashar, who are deployed in Syria for a long time now. They have been fighting with the Russian in order to regain the ground for President Bashar al-Assad, and now their objective is probably south in front of Israel. And you've got, don't forget it, Lebanon, where the election 2 days ago put the Hezbollah in a very good position.
Hamza Ghalebi, how do you interpret the fact that we haven't heard much from officials in Tehran so far?
The same reason that Israel wants to show off for his attacks is exactly because Iranians don't interest to get this critical point, which is there is a conflict and escalation with the US, and Iran want to work with the European to control the damage of deal, so they don't have interest to bring a new conflict. So Israeli try to take advantage of that to more attack, and Iranian, because of that, they keep calm.
Jasmine El-Gamal, you agree that the muted Iranian position is to keep the peace deal alive? Sorry, the nuclear deal alive.
I think it's partly the case. Yes, I think it's partly the case. I mean, I think that you saw the Iranian reaction after President Trump announced that he was withdrawing from the deal was to say, you know what, well, we're going to stay in. We haven't violated the terms of the agreement. This is squarely on the U.S.'s side. They're the ones who are choosing to pull out. And we haven't done anything wrong. And so they are trying to prove very clearly and very publicly that they are on the right side of things and that there really is not any excuse to escalate against them. They want to be seen as the right side, basically. And so you see that in the muted response after the Israeli attacks. And I think you'll continue to see the same thing. They will still continue. I think you'll see them being a little bit more assertive in defending themselves, but they will continuously say that we are not doing anything wrong. We are on the right side.
Jasmine, what's it like being in Beirut right now? Because in the past, whenever tension has spiked between Israel and Iran, oftentimes the result has been a war in Lebanon, where you are right now. This time, so far, it's not the case.
So far, and hopefully that continues. I mean, there is a little bit of tension here. As you've said, every time something happens in the region, people in Lebanon are looking around to see how that may affect them and what might happen to them. So far, things seem to be restricted to Syria. I think that's how people are hoping that it stays. There was a little bit of concern, I think, after the elections and how the elections, and particularly Hezbollah's role in the elections, was being reported on and perceived in the international press. So I think there's very much a wait and see, sort of an uneasy wait and see sense that I can feel being here.
Yeah, an uneasy sense. Lebanon staging its first general election last Sunday in 9 years. Hezbollah itself didn't increase much its gains under the very intricate system they have in Lebanon, but its allies did. Michael Pregent, is this just a one-off we've witnessed the last 2 days, or should we be braced for an escalation that could bring in Lebanon, that could bring in other players?
Well, that's the goal. That's the Iranian goal. And what I would argue, it's a different position than the other panelists, is that the things that Israel is striking are new capabilities that Iran has put in Syria. You have missile factories and rocket factories that are not being put in Syria to fight ISIS or to fight Jabhat al-Nusra or HTS. They're being put in southern Syria to threaten Israel. All of this was done under the protections of the JCPOA. It was an arms agreement for the United States, but for Iran, it was everything to reactivate their terror and logistic networks. More money to Hezbollah, more money to Iraqi Shia militias, Assad propped up, more money to buy Russian and Chinese military equipment. And, this is what we're seeing now. Israel and Iran are now at war. That's what everybody seems to be ignoring. Both countries actually believe this is the actual beginnings of a new war. Something that Iran wanted to put in place under the JCPOA was an Iranian land bridge. They now have that, but it's very weak. It's weaker now that the president walked out of the Iran deal. And what I would say about Iran adhering to the JCPOA, we could never verify Annex 1, Section T, whether or not Iran was complying with trigger mechanisms, whether they were testing or developing them. And the CIA director said, without a doubt, Iran is cheating. Now, the intelligence in our community is compartmentalized. It's a special access program. It's very centralized. So if the CIA director is saying that Iran was cheating with the JCPOA, I have to take that over a lot of the detractors.
Okay, so there's two points in what you're saying. Let's first address
Sure.
the first one, and that is
Right.
The idea that now there is a war that's started between Iran and Israel. That map we've been showing, by the way, it's the Institute for the Study of War in London that's compiled this list of places inside of Syria that are Iranian infrastructure at this point in time. Does that seem like pretty much accurate to you, General Tankal?
Yes, but just going back to 2 points. The first point is South Lebanon and the fact that in 2006 the war started in South Lebanon with rocket coming from South Lebanon to Israel. Now the problem is that the rockets are bigger and they are in Syria, and it's not straight on the border of Israel, because I just remind that Golan Heights are not Israel, even if they are occupied. They are Syrian territory. So that's the first point. Second point, of course, there is the Quds Force, the Pasdaran in Syria, but it's funny, really funny, to see that why are they in Syria and why are they in Iraq? Because in 2003, after the operation by the US, you remind what's happened in 2014, and the Iraq government now is a Shiite government. It was helped by the US, but also by the Iranian, by the Shiites, to conquer the territory taken by Daesh. So in fact, why the Iranians are very strong in Iraq and in Syria, because of the wrongdoing of the US government in all Middle East.
Hamza Galebi, on the point made there regarding that 2015 nuclear deal by Michael Pregent, your thoughts on that?
I'm not agree. I think what our analyzer said, it was fact-free. Why? Because UN, an international organization of nuclear, has proved and certificate several times that Iran complies the deal. Even the Secretary Ministry of US that Iran stay with deal and keep his obligation, which is obvious, and it's a fact-free statement that we say Iran is cheating. We can say it's not deal is not enough, but the saying that Iran cheated deal is free fact claim. And the confrontation between Israel and Iran, I think it wasn't the case. Israel more than 40 times attack directly Syria during the civil war is not new. Which is new, just Israel take it public. Why? Because they can take advantage of benefit of Trump withdraw the deal. That's it. It's not something new. And I think Israel don't interest to go the full war, neither Iranian.
Yeah, and let me get back, Michael Pregin, on that point, because our correspondent is in the Golan Heights as we speak. She said that the tension has gone down this Thursday. She even saw tourists there. There isn't the feeling that it's going to escalate, at least not in the next 24 hours or the next week.
Yeah, this hours-long campaign that Israel carried out, I mean, you're hearing the Israeli military say that they basically targeted the IRGC Quds Force infrastructure in Syria. It was an hours-long campaign. And in that, you're probably going to see this quiet after that. What's most telling is that Russia sat on its hands again. And I've been talking to Russian colleagues about this all morning, and they balance the relationship between Israel and Iran. And because they're not taking sides, they actually are, because Israel is able to do things in Syria with impunity without a response. The Assad regime claims that it shot down things, that's fine. But more importantly, the capability that Russia has in Syria, they are not using to protect Iran. And Israel is continuing to show that you can target the IRGC Quds Force in Syria with impunity, because it's not there to defeat ISIS. It's there to threaten Israel, and it built up this capability under the protections of the JCPOA.
All right, Russia's role in all of this is an essential one, or non-role in this particular case. We're going to be talking about it when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 Debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 Debate, and we're looking at direct confrontation that's been taking place in the past 24 hours between Israel and Iran. Israel claiming that it's taken out, that it's hit most of Iran's infrastructure inside of Syria. We're talking about it in the company of former UN General Dominique Trinquant, whose postings included South Lebanon. Also with us, Hamzeh Ghalibi, who served as advisor to Iran's former Prime Minister, Mir Hossein Mousavi, who's now under house arrest, has been since 2009. From Beirut, Jasmine El Gamal, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a former Middle East advisor at the U.S. Department of Defense. And from Washington, Michael Pregin, senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Michael, telling us at the end of part one how interesting it is that Russia, after telephone calls with the leadership both in Tehran and Israel standing aisle, Iran's positions in Syria are, its military positions there are new. Russia's Mediterranean base at Tartus is long-standing. The Russians, who enjoy full ties with both sides in this standoff. And a lot of folks are asking about the timing of Benjamin Netanyahu's Wednesday visit to Moscow, a visit that was about a lot more than joining in Victory Day's March of the Immortal Regiment parade, where the Israeli Prime Minister, the Russian President, and Vladimir Putin's Serbian counterpart, Alexander Vucic, proudly displayed portraits of relatives who fought the Nazis in World War II. Russia, which has since stated it will maintain close coordination with Iran on the nuclear deal.
We see this as a very alarming development. We believe that all issues must be resolved through dialogue. We have been in contact with Iran and Israel, including yesterday's meeting between President Vladimir Putin and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We've underlined the necessity of avoiding any actions that might be seen as mutually provocative.
General Trinquant, what's Russia's calculation?
The point made by the fact that the Russian missiles were not hitting the cruise missile, the Israeli cruise missile, is a very interesting point. Because of the relation between Israel and Russia, the interest of Russia in Syria is to have a stabilized Syria, where you can have your military base, your harbor, and your air base. And so to achieve that, they had to support Bashar al-Assad government. They are winning, really. The second line of Bashar al-Assad were the Iranian, and I'm not sure that there is a control between Russia and the Iranian. And of course, the fact that the main objective of the Iranian have been for a long time to be in Iraq, to be in Syria, and to be ready to hit Israel, to put pressure on Israel. And so this is something different for Russia. Russia doesn't want that, so they will not support that. And so that's why the presence of Mr. Netanyahu with Mr. Putin is of major interest. But just to go back to the JCPOA,
the 2015 Iran nuclear deal.
This agreement allow the Iranian to be in Syria. It's wrong. The agreement was on nuclear power, nuclear weapons. The point of President Macron when he was in Washington to enlarge this agreement to the position of Iran in Syria and to the rocket system, which were not in the agreement. So you can't say that because of this agreement, the Iranians are in Syria. It's exactly the contrary. I mean, the point of President Macron is that the agreement is not sufficient. You need to go further than 2025, and you need to enlarge it to the position of Iran in the region and to the rocket system. And we are clearly looking at what's happening in Syria currently, and the Israeli wants to show that they don't need an agreement because they are able to destroy the Iranian position in Syria. So by war, we can achieve what they want to achieve through an agreement. It's a completely different position.
Jasmine El Gamal, about Russia, them staying out of what's been going on the last 24 to 48 hours, does that mean that there's a rift brewing between Moscow and Tehran when it comes to Syria?
I don't necessarily think so. I think that Moscow staying out of it for now just probably means that everybody is trying to assess a situation that is extremely unclear to everyone involved. And I wanted to take a minute, Francois, to just mention something that I think is a little bit of an elephant in the room sometimes when we're talking about the Iran nuclear deal. And that is the fact that President Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal for mostly domestic reasons. President Trump campaigned on a platform of rolling back everything that President Obama had done. This is President Obama's legacy. President Trump has always said it was a bad deal, and he wanted to fulfill a campaign promise. So that's just something that we need to put on the table when we talk about why the U.S. withdrew from the deal. It wasn't because Iran wasn't complying. It was because President Trump went in to his campaign saying we were going to withdraw from the deal because President Obama did it and it was bad. The second quick point that I want to make about that and why it's so dangerous, I'm not the biggest fan of the deal, but I am a fan of diplomacy, and I am a fan of finding ways to de-escalate situations that could very quickly get out of hand in an uncontrollable way. And what's happened, both with the Russians staying on the sidelines for the moment and with the Americans withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, is that we have a deficit of diplomacy in the region that can only end badly. You have an Israel that feels completely empowered by this U.S. president. You have an Iran that feels completely under siege by this U.S. president. And you have everybody in the region basically wondering what is about to happen, with no one having a clear view of the day after, no one having a clear view of its opponent's red lines, and no one having a clear view of what the U.S. president has for the day after. It's a very dangerous situation.
Michael Pregent, has Trump got this, or is it all out of control?
Well, let's just talk about the protections of the JCPOA. When we talk about the dangerous situation, we've been watching the dangerous situation creep and creep and creep over the last 3 years under the protections of the JCPOA. And this is what I mean, that our Defense Department, the Obama administration, and our Department of State thought that any provocation against the IRGC Quds Force in Iraq or Syria would prompt the Iranians to walk away from the Iran deal. Remember, the IRGC Quds Force's budget tripled under the JCPOA. The Iranian protests They're complaining, the protesters are complaining, that Iran squandered the economic benefits of the JCPOA to fuel adventurism, to fuel ballistic missiles, to put in these destabilizing activities in Iraq and Syria. So Trump, whether it be a campaign promise, and I ran a campaign ad against Trump because Trump said it was a bad deal because he wouldn't make any money off it. And it was a bad deal because Iran is not a trusted player. Remember,
hang on, there's two different things in
Iran,
what you're saying. On the one hand, there's the merits of the deal itself, which is about containing Iran's ability to build an atomic bomb. And on the other hand, there's the fact that in the 3 years since the deal was signed, Iran has flexed its muscle more and more in the region.
Yeah, it's fueled it. The Iran deal has
How has it fueled it?
Iran's tripled the IRGC's budget. They spent the money instead on the Iranian domestic economy, they spent it on the military economy. They created 2 new militias in Iraq, Harakat Nujayba and Kitab Imam Ali. They started the Yemen offensive. They propped up Assad. They secured military contracts with Russia and China. The good thing about that is when they secured those contracts in 2015, the Iranian Toman was 3,000 to $1. Today, it's 8,000 to $1. It's lost 60% value. So those are good things. But again, Iran used the protections of the JCPOA to do exactly what they're doing in South Syria. Move in forces, deploy Afghan Shia militias on Iranian aircraft into Damascus. And all of that is already violating existing UN Security Council resolutions. So if Iran was cheating out in the open by violating existing UN Security Council resolutions, why would anybody think that they were adhering to it in the shadows? Again, the 5 sites that are protected under the JCPOA, they probably weren't cheating there. It was the 4 sites that weren't in the JCPOA where we saw activity and asked the IAEA to inspect it. They said they wouldn't because they didn't want to be a political tool of President Trump.
Jasmine Gamal?
Yeah, I just wanted to point something out to respond to some of what Michael is saying, because I think that we're conflating 2 different things right now. We're conflating the utility of the Iran deal, whether or not it was a good deal, with Iran's non-nuclear related malign activities in the region. Now, I agree 100% with Michael that Iran's malign activities, right. But what I want to say to Michael is that the activities or the advancements that Iran made, whether it's in Syria or spending money wait, but just let me finish this point, because the Obama administration, as you mentioned, was so eager to close the deal that there were things that they could have done in regards to Iran's activities, non-nuclear activities in the region, that they chose not to do, to your point, because they didn't want to sabotage the deal. So I'm with you on that. But to say that Iran took advantage of the deal to do all these other things, well, just because there's a deal in place doesn't mean that Iran has to have the permission to do all of this other stuff. If you had an administration that was willing to stick to the deal and also confront Iran in the non-nuclear field, then you could have it both ways. You could have a better deal, you could have a stronger deal, but you could also have a regime in place and an effort in place to counter Iranian malign activities in the region. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not one or the other.
Just a quick follow-up to that. Annex 2 is everything that she's talking about. Annex 2 of the JCPOA are all the non-nuclear activities. Annex 2 had Qasem Soleimani being delisted for sanctions. Annex 2 took sanctions off the Supreme Leader's multi-shell corporation conglomerate, which is worth $90 billion, called Satad. This fueled this activity. So I'm not conflating. I'm simply saying that all of this negative activity is in the Iran deal. It's called Annex 2.
Let's move on to what's going to happen next. Let me put it to you. Hamzi Ghalibi, the fact is that in the 3 years since the deal was signed, Iran has increased its might in Syria, its presence backing the Houthis in Yemen, and that makes its rivals in the region nervous.
let me explain you from Iranian point of view. The world is not just Washington. You can see how Iranians fear about their security. 70,000 NATO soldiers in American infrastructure military is all around Iran. And the Israeli attack non-stop in Syria all over, and on a daily basis, they say they are going to attack Iran. So in this situation, you can understand why the Iranians want to protect themselves. And the implementation in Iraq and Syria was because of ISIS, Daesh. And Israel never attacked Daesh. Always the Israeli attack was on Syria government force. So in this situation, Iranians accept to give up their project on nuclear program in exchange of relief in economic sanction. And from day one, American tried to convince the investor don't come to Iran. So means Iranian give something for nothing. Don't look the world from the Washington point of view. I try to let you understand what Iranian can understand, that they gave up something, but they give nothing. When we talk about the money, it was the Iranian money was blocked. And when we talk about Iranian military budget, is not the fact what Michael has said. The Iranian
it's
military,
absolutely a fact.
Iranian military budget is 3% of his budget, which is compared to Saudi Arabia is 10%. In the region that we have Daesh, Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, it's completely reasonable. And the changing the budget of Pastoran, it's not based off the regional issue. It was about a conflict.
So what happens? What happens next now? Are the hardliners going to win the day in Iran?
For sure, the Trump empowered the hardliner in Iran because almost prove all the arguments. They argue that the U.S. we can't trust the U.S. The U.S. are not going to keep the deal. Trump proved that they were right. The hardliners said that if we give up our nuclear project, they go for something else. And we now see that they talk about missile program of Iran. And they say it is not about Republic Islamic or Iran military project. It's about regime change, which is now proved by a U.S. administration. They said the question of regime change. So for sure, the Trump has empowered the hardliner in Iran.
Hamza Ghalibi, thank you for that. I want to ask Jasmine El-Gamal about a tweet that was sent out by Bahrain's foreign minister earlier today. Sheikh Khalid Al-Khalifa said, as long as Iran has breached the status quo in the region and invaded countries with its forces and missiles, any state in the region, including Israel, is entitled to defend itself by destroying sources of danger. The Bahraini foreign minister endorsing Israel's military action. What does that tell you about the region today?
It doesn't say anything good about the region today, Francois. I think it goes back to something I said earlier, where all bets are being seen as off the table now. Everybody's trying to kind of figure out what their situation is and where they stand. And making statements like that, it sort of sets the line where you can defend yourself, Israel can defend itself. If anything happens to us, we have the right to defend ourselves. And so it's sort of the scramble to position yourself in a way that no matter what happens down the line, you've already stated your position up front, which is that any sovereign country in the region has the right to defend itself. And by Israel defending itself, it's sort of setting a precedent that everyone else will want to follow in the future. One thing about what you said earlier, what my co-panelist just said about Iranian hardliners being empowered, it's not just Iranian hardliners that have been empowered by this whole situation, especially by Trump's withdrawal from the nuclear deal. Every hardliner and every ideologue in the region now has a free pass to operate, knowing that no one is going to toe the line and that diplomacy for the moment seems to be dead.
Diplomacy for the moment seems to be dead. General Trinquant, how do we get to this stage?
Yes, I completely agree about the fact that the hardliner in Iran are empowered. I also agree that Israel has the right to defend itself. But we were talking about multilateralism and UN resolution. Just to quoting, this agreement, the Iranian agreement, has been empowered by a UN resolution. And the US just threw out a UN resolution by saying we are not applying this agreement. They have voted at the Security Council for this agreement. And now they are saying, bullshit, we don't use it. It's exactly the position that will empower all the people who want war instead of diplomacy solving the problem.
Michael President, you agree?
Well, you know, I heard the general tout UN Security Council resolutions. Well, Iran is in violation of a lot of those when it comes to supporting terrorism, when it comes to ballistic missiles, when it comes to using their aircraft, their commercial airliners, to bring in militias, not only from Afghanistan, but from Iraq and Iran. So UN Security Council resolutions, if we're going to say the Iran deal should have been, put on some hallowed ground, then all of those other UN Security Council resolutions, Iran is currently in violation of those, and so is Assad, and so is Russia, for that matter. You know, UN Security Council resolutions should mean something. They do not, unfortunately.
You mean everyone has respect this resolution except the U.S.? This is your position?
Well, you had the Obama administration didn't make it a treaty, General. The Obama administration should have made this a treaty. Then we wouldn't be able to walk away from the JCPOA.
This is your domestic politics, is not the international treaty. We can't just involve in your domestic policy.
Well, our domestic politics, if you go to some of the other panelists' points, just derailed the nuclear deal. And Foreign Minister Zarif's main complaint about the U.S. not living up to the spirit of the JCPOA was that we would not encourage European investment in Iran. Well, we're out of the JCPOA now for whatever reason, but the United States was the most important player in the JCPOA, and it's going to fall apart now. But it's going to fall apart now because of what Iran has done over the last 3 years. They embarrassed the Obama administration. They embarrassed the Obama administration when they held captive U.S. sailors, when they increased their activity in Syria, when they burned U.S. flags in effigy, even though, correction, you can't say that with an inanimate object, but they burned these flags, and now it's Iran that will be held accountable for this. So if they rush to the bomb, they lose Europe, they lose Russia, they lose China. With these attacks against Israel, you know, the condemnation of Iran launching the 20 rocket barrage first is key here, because you're hearing the UN Security Council resolution, also the P5+1 nations, with the exception of China, condemn it. Russia has taken a, hey, we're not going to do anything stance. So this is very telling. Iran is becoming friendless and becoming broke, and it's the best time to put sanctions back on them. So when we do get a deal, it becomes a treaty, and we do it right so that we keep Iran from becoming a nuclear power, as opposed to letting them become a nuclear power under the JCPOA in 10 years.
Jasmine El-Gamal, is Iran becoming friendless?
Francois, thank you. I was just about to interject on that exact point. Michael, this isn't about having friends. I mean, this isn't a popularity contest, right? We're not in high school. No one cares whether Iran has friends or not.
Iran does.
Not really, because, you know, this reminds me of this silly exchange. Well, hold on a second, but this reminds me of this very silly exchange.
Go ahead.
During the Syria missile strike. Thank you. This reminds me of, well, I think I have been so far. Thank you.
Well, you said silly.
This reminds me of the very silly exchange between Russia and the U.S. Well, I'm getting to the silly exchange if you let me continue my sentence.
Right.
This reminds me of the silly exchange that Nikki Haley had with the Russian ambassador to the UN when they started telling each other in public, you don't have any friends. No, you don't have any friends. We have friends. This is really silly and childish. It doesn't matter. This is not about friends. This is about what is best for the region. This is about how do we prevent an escalation that leads to war that is in nobody's interest. And when you say that Iran was the one messing up, yes, it messed up time and time again. But the thing is, Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron and all these other world leaders would not have been lobbying the U.S. to stay in this deal. Yes, make it stronger. Yes, make it better.
For economic reasons, not security reasons.
But walking away from the deal,
reasons.
For every reason, Michael, how does walking away from the deal with no plan for the way forward and no de-escalation mechanisms, how does that help anybody?
You said no one knows what the plan is. There is a plan. I'd love to talk to you about it sometime.
Well,
Let's have a
definitely, we
debate
should
at Atlantic
definitely talk
Council or
about it.
Hudson.
One final word,
It's
because
easy.
we're almost out of time.
We
General
should.
Time
Just
Gone.
to
is a
say,
plan.
we've got a positive point on that, is that the Iranian government didn't endorse what was done last night by the Pasdaran. So because they didn't endorse that, they want to continue to negotiate with European. And that's the positive point. And we must be very careful about the fact that the hardliners are with Mr. Netanyahu and with the Pasdaran in Syria. And these are the real points where we must take care of.
All right, General Time Gone, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Hamza Ghalibi, Michael Pregent in Washington, Jasmine El Gamal for being with us from Beirut. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Charlie James. Charlie, the tension is building.
That's right, and I brought a few opinion pages and some coverage from around the world for us to take a look at, starting with the New York Times, where Dries Hilterman, he is from the International Crisis Group. He argues that while the U.S. can play a role in preventing this crisis from getting worse, it's really Russia that is in the driver's seat right now. He says that unlike the United States, Russia has relationships with nearly everyone involved in this crisis. And that Russia, quote, has an overriding interest in preventing a war in Syria between Israel and Iran, if only to preserve its own gains, starting with Assad's survival. So an interesting perspective there. Moving on to the Israeli paper Haaretz with this opinion piece from Michael Koplow. He is from the Israel Policy Forum based in New York City. And he says that the U.S. walkout means a full-on war between these two countries in Syria is far more likely. He argues that the Iran deal was keeping Iran in check from responding to repeated Israeli strikes, and that now there's a risk that if the Iran deal collapses completely, that it will create a more immediate threat for Israel to deal with. And finally, I wanted to show you coverage from Le Monde here, and here in France, from Le Monde's Jerusalem correspondent, who has the headline reading Unprecedented Military Escalation Between Israel and Iran and Syria. And he kind of sums it up with his first line reading, the rise of tensions in northern Israel is no longer just a question of words, but a military one.
All right, Charlie James, many thanks for that story. We'll continue to follow. I want to thank our panelists once again for being with us. Thank you for joining us here in the France24 Debate. On Friday, we'll have a special edition of The World This Week, where we'll be looking at the conflict that's lasted now for 70 years between Israel and the Palestinians. Join us for an exclusive report on that.